Hey everybody, welcome to Board Online, Board Offline. Today we're bringing you a game that is currently funding on Kickstarter. This is the Necronomicon Carcosa. Now Carcosa is the one that's on Kickstarter right now. This is not the first one they've done, and in fact the one that I'm going to be showing you today that I'll be teaching you from is the Necronomicon Gamebook Dagon. Okay, so the system is the same. This is the one that's currently published, so that's why I'm going to be teaching you from this one. But if you go over to the Kickstarter, which you can find a link in the description below for that, you'll be able to see all the differences. Mainly it's going to be different stories. So the whole idea here is that they have taken I believe there's four, in fact let me look right here, 4 original works of H.P. Lovecraft for the Dagon book, which is Dagon, the Hound, the Festival, and the Dream Quest of Unknown Kadith. And so those are the ones that this book is derived from. And then of course the one for Carcosa has its own H.P. Lovecraft original works that it pulls from and that it is generated from. So this is, you know, your kind of typical choose your own adventure game book, but set in this very, very thematic H.P. Lovecraft, Cthulhu setting. Now, I do have a couple things here that I want to show you. These are things that don't come with the base pledge, but you can pledge to get a play set. These are the ones that came with Dagon. You get this kind of bookmark right here. This right here is additional diary and table of combat, which are basically where you're going to be jotting down everything that you have to keep track of on these 2 pages. And so this gives you a few more, and this one actually is both English and Italian. And then this came with a map of Kingsport in both English and Italian as well. And this 6-sided die, which is the only die that you'll need, is one 6-sided die while you're playing, and it came with a pencil as well. So that's kind of cool. Has those different things available to you in the play set. And I believe if you go over to the to the Kickstarter, there's even a leather like sleeve for the book or something along those lines. Go over there and check it out. There's lots of cool stuff over there, and it's a fairly inexpensive Kickstarter to get into. I believe the base pledge is only $10 for the game book. Before we jump down to the table, I do want to mention our sponsor, Board Game Co. This is a website where you can buy, sell, and trade games. They have a whole system set up over there on the website for trading games, which is really cool. If you go over there, you can see that you even can link into your Board Game Geek account, and it'll load in all the games you have in your collection, games that you want for in trading, games that you are wanting to trade away. And it makes it very easy to figure all that out. It has a value system, and everything is just pretty great as far as how it works over there. Now, I do want to mention that they also do buy games from you as well. So that's another way you can get rid of games that you don't want in your collection anymore. And of course, you can buy games from them. They have a great selection of games over there. They even have Tapestry over there right now that's currently in stock, which is a hard one to find. So be sure to go over to Board Game Co. You can buy, sell, and trade your way into a better collection. All right, so now let's get down to the table. I'm going to show you how to play the Necronomicon Gamebook. Okay, so I'm going to be teaching you how to play the Necronomicon Gamebook. Now, I have the Dagon Gamebook, which was the previous one they put out, and currently the one on Kickstarter is Carcosa. During play, the player will need to keep and update the diary here. It's recommended that players make a few copies, unless they, of course, have the playset that comes with additional sheets of these. But if not, make a few copies of both the table of combat and the diary, since the book can be played multiple times. To begin the adventure, the player will need to distribute 6 points between force and will in any combination that they see fit. So perhaps 4 points of force and 2 points of will. Force indicates the player's ability to face trials of strength, such as fighting opponents or overcoming physical obstacles, while will indicates the player's ability to cope with stress and nightmarish visions they will inevitably face. So with that in mind, it's important to remember that a low value of force will expose the player to physical dangers, while a low value of will make the player more likely to succumb to madness. The player also starts the game with 10 points of resistance. If the player's resistance is ever reduced to 0, they die and the adventure ends unless something intervenes, and a player may never exceed 10 points of resistance. A medical kit is usable at all times except during combat and restores the player's resistance to its max value. When the player is given the opportunity to sleep, this will allow the player to recover 3 points of resistance. However, the player will also enter the Dreamlands where they will face trials and opponents as well. But when the player is allowed to sleep, if the player uses morphine, this will allow the player to enjoy dreamless sleep and the player will avoid the Dreamlands altogether. This will allow the recovery of the 3 points of resistance without the risks associated with the Dreamlands. In other words, whenever the player endures the next trial of will, whatever they roll will have 1 point subtracted from it. Madness indicates the deterioration of the mental status of the player in relation to the horrors the player will face during the journey. The player starts the game well balanced, but their mental condition may worsen after failing trials or as a result of other situations. As the player's madness deepens, the associated malice worsens. A stressed player will have +1 to the roll of the die when entering the Dreamlands, and we'll cover entering the Dreamlands in just a bit. A paranoid player, +2 to that roll, and also -1 to the total in any test of will that player endures. A schizophrenic player will have +3 to the roll entering the Dreamlands, -2 to the total in the test of will, and -1 to the total when they make a test of force. And then a delirious player, +4 to the roll of the die entering the Dreamlands, and they automatically fail all tests of will and get -2 to the total in test of force. Objects the player collects and has in their possession throughout the adventure are known as equipment. These should be jotted down when the player receives them. As you can see, the player has a maximum of 5 items they can carry at one time. Equipment may be discarded at any time other than during combat. It's also possible certain events will cause the loss of equipment. Anytime equipment is lost, simply erase it from the equipment list. Bullets and money do not count as equipment and have their own spots in the diary, as you can see, and any amount of either of these may be carried. Knives, guns, and other types of weapons may be used during combat. At the beginning of the adventure, the player has this old knife in their possession, which provides +1 force during combat. Hopefully, the player will locate a more effective weapon quickly. In combat, only one weapon may be used at a time, but the weapon may be changed each round of combat. Throughout the player's adventure, they will have to fight opponents to the death. Occasionally, the player may be able to escape a fight, but most of the time, they will not. The player kills an opponent by reducing the opponent's resistance to 0. Combat will often last multiple rounds. At the beginning of combat, the player must write down their resistance and force, as well as those of the opponent. So let's say, for instance, the player has a force of 4 plus that old knife, which provides +1, so they're starting with 5. And the player's resistance, fortunately, is still at 10. And then perhaps the opponent has a force of 5 and a resistance of 6. After writing down the force and resistance values, the player rolls a 6-sided die and adds the amount shown to the player's points of force. So let's say the player rolled a 3. You can see here force plus the weapon bonus, which is 5 total, plus the die, which is a 3 here, equals 8 total force for the player. The player then subtracts the opponent's force from the player's total force. The opponent's force is 5, the player has 8 force, so that's 3 left over. The player then takes that result and finds it on the table of comparison. The result was 3, and this table indicates how much damage is done to the player's resistance and the opponent's resistance. In this case, the player takes 0 damage to the resistance, while the opponent takes 2 damage to the resistance. If, for instance, the player had rolled a 1, then their total force would have been 6. So 6 minus 5 is 1. And here you see the player would have suffered 1 resistance point, and the opponent would have lost 2 resistance points. As you can see, the table of comparison runs from -5 to +5, so any results beyond -5 or beyond +5 yield the same result as the 5 and the -5. If after this round of combat neither the player nor the opponent are dead, then mark the current round with an X and repeat the process. Keep in mind the player can change their weapon each round if they have multiple available, and therefore they could potentially gain different bonuses. The player may also choose to fight without any weapons, in which case they do not receive a bonus at all. If the player's resistance ever drops to 3 or lower, they must begin subtracting 2 from their die results during combat. So this 3 would be reduced to a 1, while a 2 would be reduced to 0. A 1, however, is also simply reduced to 0. If the resistance of the opponent ever drops to 3 or lower, then the opponent's force is reduced by 2. As previously mentioned, the player will be presented with opportunities to rest during the adventure. Anytime a player sleeps without using morphine, they should make a note of the section they're currently in and then roll a die. The result will send them to a particular section of the Dreamlands. In this case, 5. Remember, though, that the player's level of madness may affect the result of the die roll. So, for instance, if the player is stressed, they add 1 to the result of the Dreamlands die roll, and therefore would have ended up at section 6. Anytime the player enters the Dreamlands, they do so with the same resistance value they had prior to sleeping. The player has access to no equipment or weapons while in the Dreamlands. Now, don't worry, those items will still be waiting for the player if they return. Points of resistance lost while in the Dreamlands are also lost in reality. It's also possible to die in the Dreamlands, in which case the player's fate will be revealed to them by the text in the Dreamlands. It's also possible to die while in the Dreamlands, in which case the player's fate will be revealed. If a player survives the Dreamlands and is not redirected elsewhere, they always return to the section of the adventure from which they arrived. And remember, since the player did sleep, despite the fact that it might not have been particularly restful, they do recover 3 resistance points after leaving the Dreamlands. During the adventure, a player may rechase sections they've already visited as they work their way through Kingsport. Unless otherwise stated, any previously defeated opponents remain defeated. On the other hand, if the player escaped an opponent without defeating them, then that opponent is still waiting there and with their resistance back to its starting value. Any objects previously collected may not be recollected, and if the player left any objects behind in a section, that object will no longer be there upon the player's return. In this book, players will face puzzles, hostile creatures, and extreme situations. It's possible the player may die facing a difficult trial or fall into a trap hidden behind a crossroads. In some cases, the player will simply be forced to start again as a result of death. In other cases, the adventure will continue due to some inexplicable salvation, though the player may find themselves irrevocably changed. Whatever happens, in order to enjoy the gaming experience to its fullest, players must accept their fate. And there you go. That's everything you need to know to play the Necronomicon game book. I have had a lot of fun with this so far. I'm definitely looking forward to getting deeper into the story. I have not beaten it yet. I haven't died, so but I haven't beaten it. So I'm working my way through. I'm doing all right. I think I'm missing like a point of resistance right now where I stopped. So definitely looking forward to trying to see where this adventure goes. Get over on that Kickstarter if you think this is at all something you'd be interested in supporting. They, I believe, have already funded, so you don't have to worry about that. It's just a matter now of getting yourself a copy. So, without anything else, if you are bored online, bored offline.